Today's story is Seymour in Hawaii, The Search for the Next Campfire Coach, written by Carol Craven Bates and illustrated by Kari Wimsatt. If you would like a copy of this book, there's a link for it in the description. Chapter 10. After his talk with Mr. Jordan and Mr. Trace, the Smatosaurus promptly made his way back to the sea. While he was there, he treated himself to a delightful ocean smorgasbord. By the time Seymour got back to the convention center, the meeting had been in progress for quite some time. Seeing no need to walk all the way around to the front of the building, the Smotter entered by the side door. Being quiet as he opened and closed the door never crossed his mind. Everyone in the building could see and hear him as the door swished open and slammed shut. When Seymour stepped inside the auditorium, some of the people recognized him from the day before. The audience broke out in boisterous cheers and applause. At first, the Smotter was a little frightened. He thought some of the ruffians from the beach had come back to finish what they'd started. When Seymour finally determined that everyone was friendly, he attempted to take a seat on the second row. Mr. Mike was standing at the podium, and when he saw that the Smatosaurus had finally entered the building, he gave a sigh of relief. The preacher pointed his finger at Seymour and then gave him a thumbs up to show the Smotter he was glad he had arrived. Mike had been anxious about getting on with the final aspects of choosing a camp coach, but he couldn't proceed without Seymour being in attendance. Now that his choice of candidates was present, he could surge ahead, but decided to call for a short recess before asking Seymour to speak again. Ben led the way into the break room with Mike and Seymour right behind him. As soon as he stepped inside the room, his nose was met with a horrendous smell. Whoa, what died in here last night? What's that wretched smell and where's it coming from? The Smatosaurus stepped around Ben and headed for the sink area. There's nothing bad in here, Mr. Ben. That's just my snack you smell. I brought it in earlier on my first trip here. I was the first one here this morning, and I didn't know where to put my snack, so I put it under the sink so no one would eat it up before I could be here to help them. Seymour proceeded to the sink and opened the cupboard doors underneath. There lay a 3-foot, partially decayed red snapper with his head, tail, and everything still attached. Before either Mike or Ben could stop him, the Smotter went about dragging it out on the floor, across the room, and hoisted it up on top of the table. Mr. Barlow grabbed Seymour's arm and pulled him away from the disgusting sight. "Leave that obnoxious thing alone and let's get out of here." Ben reached for his cell phone to call the maintenance department of the hotel to come clean up the mess. When he hung up, he said to the other two, "Come on, let's get back to the meeting and leave this for the cleanup crew." The Smatosaurus wasn't happy about being cheated out of his luscious snack, so he took several large bites before he allowed the two men to lead him back into the auditorium where the meeting was ready to resume. There seemed to be a lot more people in the audience for this particular meeting. At the beginning of the week, there were several vacant seats scattered throughout the auditorium. On this day, all the stationary seats were filled and folded-up chairs lined all along any available wall space. Mike introduced Seymour to the crowd just in case someone hadn't been there before. The Smatosaurus seemed to be fascinated with the extra-large audience and kept staring into the crowd with an astonished expression on his face. He soon forgot all about Mike Barlow standing next to him and never heard when his name was being called. The preacher repeatedly spoke to the Smotter, but he didn't respond in any way. After a second and third attempt to get his attention, Mike finally patted the Smatosaurus on the top of his head. This seemed to jar him back to reality. Mr. Barlow continued, "Seymour, if you'll tell us another Bible story, I'll sit down until you've finished. Then the committee will take a final vote on who we want to be our campfire coach." While the preacher quietly left the stage to take his seat next to Ben, the Smatosaurus adjusted the microphone, even though he seldom stood close enough to use it. The Smotter was not sure what he wanted to talk about. His mind was racing to come up with a topic. "Well, I can tell you about the time I was swimming in the Jordan River and almost got hit on the head with an axe. It just missed my right ear by a hair. Of course, my ears don't stick out like yours do because mine are closer to my body. That way they don't slow me down in the water. Sometimes I have to get away from trouble pretty fast, you know. On that particular day, I was just about to take a bite out of my fish dinner when an iron axe head came zipping through the water. It made a big old splash and sent sound waves all through the river. It scared me so much it made me lose my grip on my next meal. At first I didn't know what that thing was. I sure was glad it missed my head, though. That heavy hunk of iron would have knocked me cuckoo. Since my dinner swam away, I decided I better get out of the water and go see who threw that monstrosity in there. That's when it happened. I was almost to the top of the water when I narrowly missed getting struck in the head again, this time by a stick. Out of nowhere, a sharp, pointy limb came splashing into the water. I never knew the Jordan River to be so dangerous. It was starting to give me the heebie-jeebies. If that wasn't enough to scare me out of my wits, suddenly that hefty metal object came floating right back up to the top of the water. That large chunk could have gotten me both ways, coming and going. When that heavy thing came rocketing back up, I knew instantly there was something not right about that picture, so I got out of the water to see what made it do that. Besides, I wasn't sure that iron thing wouldn't come back and do it again. When I finally got to land, I saw a group of guys leaving the area. They had a bunch of trees they were toting off. It looked as if they had just chopped them down. Everyone was leaving, but one guy hung back from the rest. I ran over to talk to him and found out his name was Elisha. He said the sons of the prophets were chopping down trees to make logs. They wanted to build a larger building to sleep in. One man didn't have an axe of his own, so he had to go borrow one from his friend. While he was working, the axe head came off the handle and fell right into the Jordan. I found out that Mr. Elisha was a prophet, too. He's the one that tossed that tree branch into the water. The limb landed at the same spot where the axe went into the water, and God made it float right back to the surface. I know a floating axe head sounds crazy, but that's exactly the way it happened. I saw the whole thing. In fact, I almost have a hole in my head to prove it. After everyone had gone, I decided I'd leave too. With all that iron coming and going, I wanted to stay clear of the Jordan River for a while, so I went to the Coral Reef Chronicle to report the incident and give a full report to my boss. I told the story to Mr. Teeters. I always called him Mr. Teeter-Totter. Mr. Teeters said he wanted to believe me, but he had his doubts about the whole thing. He said, "That story sounds a little fishy to me." Old Mr. Teeter-Totter thought I was telling him a whopper. He asked if I had another eyewitness that could corroborate that the story was true. I had to tell him that everyone who had seen it was gone and I didn't know where they were. Then he puffed out his chest and told me he didn't think that could possibly happen. I remember his words exactly. He said, "There's no way a chunk of iron is going to float back up in the water. You must have eaten too much loco weed." Even though he wasn't convinced my story was valid, Mr. Teeters needed one more story for that day, so he finally decided to herald it. He said it was against his better judgment, though. I knew I hadn't eaten any loco weed, but I've seen what happened to horses and sheep that had. I saw how it affected their brain and made them do crazy things, so I always avoided eating any of that stuff. I always wanted my mind to be clear and sharp. I knew I didn't make up that story about the floating axe head either. Later on, I found that same story in the Bible. It's located in 2 Kings 6, 1-6. Suddenly, the Smatosaurus stopped talking, raised his head, and sniffed the air. "I'm powerful hungry. Is that donuts I smell?" Kari Daniels, who had been seated on the second row, stood and climbed the steps to the platform. She was dragging a very large plastic container behind her. "No, Seymour, that isn't donuts you smell. That amazing aroma happens to be homemade chocolate chip cookies. After dinner last night, I begged the chef in the hotel kitchen to let me use his facilities to bake these cookies for you. I had to promise to leave his work area spotless when I left, and I gladly did that. These cookies are made from my mommy's favorite recipe because I wanted them to be special. I want to apologize for being so rude to you yesterday. It was very unchristian of me. Please accept these cookies and my most sincere apology." The Smotter looked at Kari, gave her a big smile, and said, "Got milk?" Seymour quickly took the handle of the large container from Miss Daniels and turned toward the stairs. "Thank you for this good treat. The best gift of love is something fun to eat. I gladly forgive you for what you said, but I really can't remember because it didn't stick in my head." As he descended the stairs, someone stood to help the Smotter drag the huge container to a quiet corner in the very back of the building. There he could enjoy his cookie snack in peace. With the Smotosaurus off the stage and placidly eating cookies, Mike returned to the podium. Before the committee took a final vote, Mr. J.B. Lakeland stood and gave his heartfelt endorsement in choosing Seymour as their next coach. He stated that his granddaughter Daria was very timid about being away from home, but she told him if Seymour was going to be there, she would gladly go to camp this year. After a short talk explaining how the final vote would be taken, the preacher requested all the committee members for the Word of God Church to please stand. Everyone who wanted to vote for Seymour to be the new campfire meeting coach was to sit back down. Anyone who was opposed was to remain standing. Every single committee member immediately sat down. The Smotosaurus was unanimously voted in as the new coach for the campfire meetings. Even grumpy Donald Haywood, the treasurer and CPA, had changed his mind about Seymour and given his vote of confidence. The Smotter finished his cookie snack and came back into the meeting area of the room. Mike was still standing at the podium. When the preacher noticed the Smotosaurus had returned to the second row of seats, he called to him and asked that he come back up on stage. Looking right at Seymour, he asked, "Seymour, would you be willing to relocate for 6 weeks this summer and fill the position of campfire meeting coach for Camp Hosanna of Battle Creek, Michigan? We'll work out a salary package that will be very satisfactory to you, I'm sure." The Smotter looked across the audience and shrieked, "What? Tell Bible stories for pay? No way. I'll work for food, though. Isn't Battle Creek where they make all that good cereal?" The preacher glanced over at the youth minister who was sitting on the edge of his seat. They both flashed a big smile. Mike was thinking, "Kellogg, keep those big flakes coming." Ben was thinking, "Battle Creek will never be the same." Before the Smotosaurus left the auditorium for the last time, he agreed to be at the campsite in Battle Creek, Michigan, the day before all the campers arrived for the first week of camping. As he exited the building, the assembly gave Seymour a standing ovation, with cheers and whistles that could be heard in the adjoining hotel lobby.